We'll get started here in just a minute as people roll in. We're going to give people a few minutes to join us, and then we'll get started with the webinar. As you join us, if you'd like to place your name and maybe where you're from in the chat, that would give us a sense of the breadth and depth of attendance today.
If he brings you happiness, then I wish all the best. It's your happiness that matters most of all. But if we ever break your heart, if the teardrops ever start, I'll be there before the next teardrop.
Okay, I think we'll get started now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Chuck Lennox with the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation. I want to welcome you to the fourth in our webinar series, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation, hosted today by the Association for Heritage Interpretation in Great Britain and Ireland. The association was established in 1975 and has over 500 members around the world. I'd like to thank Time Looper and Agents of Discovery for their support of our translation service. Spanish language translation can be reached by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. Today's webinar is Dub London, a case study in co-creation, inclusion, and engaging interpretation at the Museum of London. As the speakers are talking, if you have any questions, please place them in the question box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the talk. Let me pass the screen over to Bill Bevan, representing the association, to introduce our speakers. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Chuck. So we wanted to bring you this exhibition for our contribution to the webinar series, because Dub London won 2 awards in the AHI Engaging People Awards 2021, one for Untold Stories and also the overall AHI Award for Excellence. The citation for why it won reads as such: Dub London is a co-curated project that provokes thought, reveals meanings, engages emotions, and tells little-known stories, and which has successfully attracted new and diverse audiences to the museum. And this evening, we're going to meet the team who put the exhibition together, and we'll find a little bit more about the exhibition and why it won the award. So with me tonight, we have from the team, and if you've got your screens on, if you could wave when I mention your names, but hopefully people can see your names as well. Emily Durant, Senior Exhibition Project Manager at the Museum of London. Emily managed the process of developing content, design and production for the display. We have Cedar Lewison, who is an artist, writer and curator, currently the curator of site design at the South Bank Centre, London, and Terry Dhaliwal Davis, curatorial producer at the Museum of London. They were co-curators of Dub London. Cedar proposed the exhibition and conducted research, oral history interviews, and made links with the Black London community. He then left the museum, and Terry continued the community engagement and research and led the design of the space and exhibition at the museum. We then have Papa Face of Dub Vendor Record Shop. Papa Face sells records across London and is a Reggae International MC, appearing on a number of iconic record labels. Don was a key partner in producing, advising and training for the exhibition, and I think it was engagement with Papa Face was noted in the the award assessment of the exhibition by the site judges. Brenda Edwards, MBE, is a creatively versatile artist with an international professional career spanning over 25 years as a principal dancer, choreographer, producer, artistic director and mentor. Brenda became the first Black woman to work in a British ballet company, the English National Ballet. Brenda worked closely with Papa Face and was a key partner in dancing her way through the exhibition. And as I've alluded to, Brenda and Papa Face were the faces of the immersive record shop experience, which we'll find out a little bit more about in a minute. And they were key to engaging visitors with the exhibition. So before I start asking questions of our panel, and the format will be, I've got a set of questions, 4 or 5 questions I will ask, and they are prompts for the team to tell us how they put together such an excellent project. Before we do that, I want to share my screen and show you a short video.
Bill, can I just correct you on one thing there?
Yeah.
That you said in my biography. I just want to just correct you. I did leave the Museum of London, but I continued to work on the project until it opened. So I didn't leave the project. I continued to work on it until it opened. I just want to correct on that point.
Thank you for clarifying that. So I'm just going to share the screen so that we can see, I hope, the video put together by the Museum of London. I'll press play now. Hopefully everybody can see and hear that.
I think it's important to talk about dub today because a lot of that, the generation of artists and musicians are passing away. Plus I also think that it kind of is the bass, it's the drum of most music.
I think it's not just somebody going out to buy records and playing it. It's more of a cultural thing for us. And used to hear these songs and they sort of intertwine into you, you know, you remember them.
I think it's very important to document dub now and make sure that the living knowledge experiences of people are included in that, especially if it's to do with London and documenting the history of London in the correct way.
For me, it was a very impactful, personally I guess it's nostalgic walk down a very, very vital part of
I think that's what it is for us anyway as Black Londoners. We're able to come here and see something that actually instantly have a connection with.
Okay, I'll stop sharing there now. So what I'm going to do first is hand over to Terry, who will say a little bit more about the project. Thank you, Terry.
Hello, everybody. Hi. I'm just going to put Dub London in context to the wider museum. So as part of the Museum of London, there has been a 5-year major collection project, and Dub London has been part of that. And what Curating London is about, it's been inspired by sort of lived experiences of Londoners, and the sort of our collection has gaps, and we wanted to do kind of contemporary collecting really. And when Dub London came about, which was the idea from Cedar, it was taking like a pan-wide approach and looking across London and focusing particularly on London independent reggae sort of specialist shops. And the reason behind that is because these shops have always been the centre of community for a lot of people, and that was the initial focus. And we wanted to sort of tell those untold stories that don't have a voice very often. And we worked with so many partners, and in particular Papa Face and Brenda as part of Dub Vendor. So there were 15 specialist record shops. There were as an academic, there was lots of other organisations that came involved, and that should show a bit later as we speak. But I just wanted to put it in context of how we worked in the Museum of London. So I'm going to pass you on to Emily now, who's just going to explain a bit more about the process.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now because I've got some visuals to show you. Okay, so we'll start presenting. So yeah, as Terry said, the project comprised engagement, events and collecting, but here I just wanted to take you on a quick walkthrough of the display so you can kind of contextualize a bit of what you saw in that film, and you can sort of understand what we're talking about as we go through. So the display was in our free temporary space at the Museum of London. It's around 100 square meters. It was due to open in May 2020, but of course COVID happened and that was impossible. So we worked remotely during lockdown, and then it opened in October that year. It closed again for a second lockdown, and then opened and remained open until a brilliant closing party pictured here in September 2021. And what was extraordinary about the space is that it's a fairly open space within the museum. It's kind of a through route, but as you walked in, it was really, you were kind of hit by the buzz of music and voices, and it felt like a truly immersive kind of musical experience. One of the first things you saw was this speaker stack, which is part of a sound system, and it was lent to us by Channel One Sound System. It was the first year it hasn't been used at Notting Hill Carnival, which is a major carnival in London held every year in August. And I just wanted to show you this introductory wall, which we decided to host a musical mind map to kind of represent the debates that we had really within the whole team about sort of musical influences and connections.
Hey, Emily, are you sharing your, I'm sorry, this is Song. Are you sharing your screen?
Yeah, can you not see it?
No.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Let's try it. It's okay. Let's try it again.
I'm going to have to go back all the way to the front. Hold on. Can you see?
You see a blue
screen. All
yes.
Right. I'm starting from the beginning.
So sorry.
Sorry, guys. So that was the closing party. Can you see? Someone
yes,
singing?
perfect now. Thank you.
That's the speaker stack. And here's our musical mind map. So we're back at the introduction. So yeah, we hope this just kind of orientated visitors in you know, where dub and reggae sat. So thinking about kind of written interpretation, we wanted to offer something engaging and interactive, and we had the idea of creating record shop browsers with information printed on vinyl record sleeves for visitors to flick through themselves. Then COVID happened and we had to lose the interactive element, but we kept the browsers. Here you can see these sort of record sleeves printed with personal stories from fans, dub artists, producers. You can also see some of the materials, colors and designs that we had throughout the show, and these were inspired by visits the design team made to record shops across London. I think the others will speak a bit more about that process later on. This, of course, is the record shop counter where Papa Face and Brenda worked, and members of our visitor experience team also assisted. So you can see some of the hundreds of records that we collected throughout the project. You can see part of the slideshow with hundreds of images. You can see a film at the end where dub producer, Mad Professor, shows us into his studio and gives us a lesson in music production. A little bit of detail on a display case that we sort of filled with memorabilia, Rastafari items, fashion. This is an outfit on the mannequin by a Scottish Jamaican designer, Nicholas Daly, who celebrates and updates kind of the iconic dub style. There's poetry books there by Linton Kwesi Johnson. There's a melodica like the one used by Augustus Pablo. And here's an example of part of the project, all about photography. We commissioned, borrowed and acquired photography by a number of artists, including Adrian Boot, Eddie Ochere, Charlie Phillips, Dennis Morris. You can see some of them here mounted on a wallpaper made up of hundreds, maybe thousands of flyers for dub and reggae nights. And again, Henry mentioned a big part of the project was collecting oral history. So I just wanted to show you one of the ways that we presented oral histories. This was in our sort of sound listening booth. You could also listen to oral histories pressed onto vinyl records at the record shop counter. But here we had to change our method again due to COVID. So instead of a push button, we had foot pedals, which was actually really popular with visitors. I think it gave a recording studio style feeling. And here is the map of record shops that we worked with across London. So this image is a really lovely image, and it was on the t-shirts of the hosts who were working in the record shop. So moving on, just to touch on where you might be able to kind of find a bit more resources now. There are lots of ways to experience the display now, even though it's closed. And I think we might be able to share some of those resources in the chat, or Song will say how you'll be able to find those later. Check out the Museum of London website. There's a Sound Clash hub, articles, films and more on the theme. We also have a YouTube channel with lots of those films. And we also created a guided exhibition tour on a platform called Smartify. That's a really lovely walkthrough, which is narrated by Cedar. It was accessible in the display via QR code, and we actually had a really good hit rate for that during the display, and it's still available on the Smartify app and on the website, and it allows you to delve a bit deeper into curated content. And of course, there's a Spotify playlist for you to go and listen to some dub and reggae. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emily. I should have said this earlier. If anybody has any questions, do put them in the chat. I've just put a comment in the chat to let you know how to ask questions, and I'll do a roundup at the end. But panelists are also welcome to answer questions as you see them come in. So the first question, which I think Cedar's going to start the reply for, is the AHI judges were very much impressed by the very strong aspect of Dub London, which was its excellent community co-curation. Can you just tell us a little bit about why this was important, and how did you undertake the co-curation, please?
Yes, for sure. And hello, everyone. Happy to be here. So the first thing to say really in relation to Dub London and the research that I undertook, I spent about a year doing community research, speaking to various communities. But the first thing really to say is that the subject is kind of Afro-Caribbean, Caribbean, London related. So it's about the Afro-Caribbean Jamaican community in London. So those are the communities that I was really focusing on trying to connect with and speak to. And, you know, that's my family heritage as well. So it was a very personal undertaking for me. And I drew on a lot of personal family history from growing up, you know, going to carnival when I was a kid, checking out my uncle's sound systems and record collections and all that. So it was a very personal project from the start. And the first thing I did when I started the Museum of London, they basically said to me, research dub, and that was basically the brief. And they didn't really, I don't think they really knew what dub was at all. So just defining the terms of what dub was, which is still a very kind of nebulous term, was quite important. So setting about to just define what dub was, and really I still think it's something that potentially the Museum of London, you know, don't necessarily have their head around this idea of what dub necessarily is, because it's really a combination of so many different types of music, and probably the best person to talk about might be here is probably Pupperface. And so really what I did, the first person I spoke to was a records producer called Chris Lane from a record label called Fashion Records, and he basically put me at a kind of legendary record label called Fashion Records. And so Chris Lane, who's a producer, who Papa Face has worked with massively as well on Fashion Records. I had a really good chat with Chris Lane, who quickly, you know, put me on my place as to my lack of understanding about the history of dub and reggae. But Chris was very generous, and then put me in touch with, and basically recommended that I go and speak to a record shop owner called Wallaby Bryan at Supertone Records, a kind of one of the oldest reggae record shops still functioning in London. And so I went to speak to Wallaby at Supertone Records, and who was basically incredibly grumpy and didn't really want to kind of engage. So that I think, and that's kind of interesting in itself, in the fact that so many of the communities that I ended up speaking to were incredibly cautious and suspicious and didn't really want to engage with the museum or cultural sector. They were kind of outside of it. So it took a lot of conversations and persuasion and explanation and talks and kind of getting people on board to be involved in the process and even engage with a museum, because they had no interest in it. But what I kind of learned, well, I learned so much, particularly through speaking to Wallaby Bryan. He's like, he's around 92 years old, born in Jamaica, moved to London. His whole life history basically covers the story of reggae music and leading into dub as well. So through various conversations, I think I did about 10 oral histories with Wally at Supertone Records, and that really was the foundation of the project. And because the subject was so huge in terms of reggae music and dub music in relation to the Caribbean and London, and this whole kind of migration story, what kind of occurred to me through those conversations was that the reggae record shop in London could be a frame to which lots of different subjects could fit into. And so that's where the idea of a reggae record shop in the museum, in this kind of small space in the museum, that's where the idea of a reggae record shop came from, and installing a reggae record shop into the museum. And also the idea that reggae record shops are kind of like these knowledge zones. They're a bit like libraries, and the people behind the counter in reggae record shops are kind of these fountains of knowledge. And that was really the idea of, really, for the exhibition, I really didn't really want any interpretation. The idea of interpretation was the person behind the counter should be the person that you speak to. And so the interpretation would be an oral form of interpretation, really. So that was one of the key things. So speaking to Wallaby at Supertone particularly, and then the other 14 reggae record shops that came on board, I quickly got in touch with Dub Vendor Records, and I went to speak to them, and then that's how I got in touch with Papa Face and went down to Ladbroke Grove and spoke to him, and so the reggae record shops really became a kind of one of the core communities that we spoke to. But you know, I spent, like I said, I spent about a year researching the project, going to reggae record shops around London, going to sound system gigs around London. I also did a lot of research into Caribbean food. So whenever I would go to a reggae record shop in London, I would try and find some Caribbean food, because the Caribbean food shops also had this kind of autonomous zone element to them, these kind of the reggae record shops in these communities are kind of like these non-corporate spaces that are kind of rarer and rarer in London and all around the world. I often equate them to like pie and mash shops. I almost think they should be given like UNESCO heritage status, some of these old reggae record shops in London, because they're such special places. So so doing all that research for around about a year, often people were saying to me that I had like the best research job in London. It was really an amazing period of just like going around the shops, speaking to the owners. But one very important thing that I'd mention, and the way that the kind of acquiring the records from the record shops came about, was basically going into the record shops and not wanting to abuse their time. So I didn't want to just go into these record shops and speak to people and abuse their time and take their time for free. So one way of being able to pay people for their time was saying to them, listen, we've got some money for you, and we want you to make a selection of records that we will buy from you, and that will form part of the exhibition. So that was very important from the start, about not abusing the people's time that we were working with, because oftentimes in the museum sector, and in the culture sector, that it's a very one-sided relationship where the museums think they have this kind of crazy assumption that everybody's going to just like want to give their time for free and be really happy to be there. But as I said at the start, a lot of the communities I was speaking to really weren't interested in any museum, and that was really interesting as well, that, you know, many of them had never been to the Museum of London or any other museum. So it was important to be able to engage people, but also to be able to pay them for their time. So I guess that's a start. That's a start of the process of how I started to engage the community. One other brief thing I would mention that became very important, another important community that were involved in the kind of co-curation of the project was the Rastafari movement. So Rastafari culture and heritage in relation to reggae music is incredibly important, and it's often very misunderstood. People don't really understand what Rastafari is often about, I think. So getting some people from the Rastafari movement also involved in the project, in the language around the project, introducing patois, Jamaican patois, into the kind of dialogue of the project. All these things were very important. And again, some of the meetings I had with the Rastafari movement, initially, they were very, very skeptical, let's say, about wanting to be involved in the project. So it took a lot of communication and dialogue to get them on board, and it was a pretty tough process. But eventually, when they did come on board, it was really worth it, I would say.
Thank you. Cedar, Papa Faith, you were mentioned there in Cedar's reply. Would you like to add anything to what Cedar's said? I think you're on mute, I'm afraid.
Sorry about that, sorry.
Right.
Yeah, Cedar's summed up a lot of things that I would have said, you know, about the project and everything like that. But getting the community involved is very, very important. And with the record shops as well, we're quite like a family. So by the time somebody's done something, by the end of the night, we would know about it. And I just think the music is very, very important for us. And it's not something that you would just give away lightly, your knowledge and everything like that, because you're always wary that somebody will take it and then take it as their own. So that's, I think, the reason why Cedar might have had that wall at first. And you've got to break it down, because people got to learn to trust you, you know, and that's how it is. So I think, you know, done a really good job to start it up. And I was approached and we knocked heads together and said, you know, it would be really good to have actual a proper record shop within the museum, and which would make it more authentic, you know, in that way, so that people come in and go, oh, what's that music? Oh, it's a record shop, you know, and they come and ask us. I had people in there came in and go, I haven't got a clue about the music. All I know is Bob Marley. Could you advise me or recommend something for me? And I say, yeah, I'll play something for you and play it. And just, well, do you like that? Electronic ones or maybe more organic ones? And they bought the records. And with reggae, once you've got one, you want to explore more, and you learn there's different branches of this music. There's so many different branches. It's been going for over 50 years now. So there's different styles of music that you can enjoy with it, you know, and it's a community thing. I grew up with it from listening with my mom, my dad playing music on an old gram. And I was just going, what is this? You know, and I'm at 4 or 5 years old, and I just wanted, as I grew, I wanted to build my own sound system. And I did that in the 70s, built my own sound system. And then I met John from Dubvend, and we opened up the record shop, and it just took off from there. And it's a community base, as I said. If you're in Clapham, Brixton, wherever, everybody's drawn towards that shop, because that's where people meet. That's where people need to know where a dance is going to be held, because you get the flyers, which were on the wall of the museum. And it was a community hub. Record shops were a community hub, and still are, you know, whatever shops are still going, it still is. That's it, really.
Yeah, I think you've both touched on something which is really important in this co-curation process. It's not a one-way process, in that the museum has taken content to put on walls. And a feeling I got with Dub London is that the community really helped to shape what this whole exhibition looked like, sounded like, and what it told us. And I think I don't know whether Cedar or you, Papa Face, would like to add a little bit more about that sort of very much active community contribution to the exhibition.
Yeah, the idea was to have the record shop so that you could play the music. So then if a man comes there with his son or his grandson, they come there, goes, look, this is what I've been talking about. And then their eyes opened that, wow, I get it now. I get it. I get what he's been talking about all the time, going through one ears and out the other. They could actually physically see it. And I think that's what really helped at the museum, how it worked, you know? And yeah, that was the main thing, and it came across, and it worked very well. I don't know if you want to add anything, Cedar, or...
No, that's all. I mean, just as I said, it's just such a massive culture, you know,
yeah.
Reggae record shops, sound system culture, and we just really, you know, I think the Reggae record shop was key and core to the whole thing, and we touched on sound system culture a little bit with Channel One and some other things. We did some stuff with Jar Youth as well, and some other sound systems. But you know, there are so many different aspects to the culture, and so many different musics. You know, from you know, we start what I was saying when I was speaking to Wally in Supertone Records, you know, when he was basically giving me the history of the music, starting at Mento essentially, and going through there. So, you know, there is a kind of history to this music, and there is a kind of strict timeline, to be honest with you, as you know, Papa Face. So, yeah, it's about kind of trying to represent that in the right way, and you know. All I would say very, very briefly is that I think part of the process started, you know, I worked on a project before this called Collecting Birmingham in Birmingham with Birmingham Museums. So that was a very much a community curation project as well. So I had some experience of this kind of community curation and going into communities. And I think one of the things I would say is that, you know, I think you kind of have it's good to have a selection of options of things to present the community when doing this kind of community curation. It's not good to just, I think sometimes it's good to have some ideas up front that the community can feed into as well. So you're offering a kind of bit of guidance, but also getting the feedback from them as well. But yeah, that's enough, I think, for the time being from me.
Thank you, Cedar. I think that leads in very nicely to our next question, really, is so, you know, the people who are attending this webinar, what can they learn from your experiences? So the next question is for Terry and then Brenda. What advice, hints or tips do you have for any other organisation to successfully and ethically co-create a project?
Hello, everybody. Well, leading on from Papa Face and Cedar, I just need to add to that other people that were involved was we had an academic, Michael Riley, who does a Black research project that is like sort of nationwide. He was very key in sort of supporting and mentoring this project along as well. And actually, where, for example, Women in Dub came in, he would sort of pinpoint where, like, contacts. So just like with Chris Lane and Wally, we did have an academic on board. And actually with the Rastafari movement as well, it was particularly the sisters in the Rastafari movement UK were really, really strong, bringing the story about women in dub, and especially about the social, political element of dub. And it's really important to know that as well. And with the advice and hints and tips, I mean, there's kind of loads, and everybody's kind of touched on it, but it is, Cedar mentioned it, it's really important. It's paying for that community experience, for that community lived experience, and paying them decently. And it's a struggle that museums have, because we never know how, you know, we never get paid well ourselves, but it's always a struggle, but trying to find that fair fee, and in particular with Papa Face and Brenda, paying them as a consultant. So because we are asking for their experience. The other tip is to be, you know, I think you should be honest, and you have to express your lack of knowledge. You need to be able to listen. You need to give them credit. You need to explain your job. I think my job is to not speak institutional jargon to them, which is basically you have to interpret what the museum wants in like everyday language. I mean, I struggle with museum language, so it makes it easier for me. And I think it's about staying in regular contact with your community partners. So even if you think that part of that project is sort of, you know, either at an end or, you know, you're not accessing it at the moment, I think people need to know the whole. They need to know the whole project. They need to be invested in it. And it's really, really important, because then that's when you keep people on board. So in particular with the Rastafari movement, where it can be like sometimes a bit difficult to feel that, you know, like there's barriers there. I mean, it was not necessarily having a meeting in the museum. So I would go for walks with the Rastafari sisters, and we would just go for walks in the park and we would discuss things. And it was a really lovely way of doing it. And also, you know, when they come into the museum, it's about making them feel really welcome. And I would say the other important thing is you need to keep that relationship, because it is not just about Dub. It's not just about this project. So with Popperface and Brenda, you know, we've gone beyond this, and we've built up a really life. Well, I hope we have. They might say something differently, but we built up a really strong relationship going into the new museum, and how we see things moving along. And actually, it's really influenced projects that we are doing. So I'm currently working on a grime exhibition, which has just opened, and words spoken by Brenda and Popperface have really kind of influenced me of how I approach community. And don't hog them, share them, spread your partnerships into other projects, because they've got such a wealth of experience. I don't know what you think, Brenda.
I agree with you. I think one of the most important thing for me was to be inclusive, and that's one tip that I would really advise. I think from the very beginning, the onset, from Cedar working with Popperface and then Terry working together, the ownership, everyone had real ownership of the project. And that also meant that the visitors' experience had their ownership. I think the trust was really, really important from the museum. The museum themselves trusted the project, and the staff, I can't emphasize that the staff was also engaged in the project from the very beginning. We had Dub hosts, so the host would also be part of it's almost like it was an immersive experience. The record shop was the immersive experience. It was a performance within itself. And I think that worked incredibly well. I also felt that the museum had, and that was set from the very beginning, from Emily's engagement with Popperface and Cedar and Terry, that kind of relaxed approach, that everybody's language, the language is really, really important. The invitation was the right invitation. The museum invited the Black community, the Dub community, the reggae community, the white community, people, music lovers. The museum invited, because I felt that on a day-to-day basis, even though everyone had a different interpretation of what Dub was. Dub to them was possibly punk, it was grime, it was jungle, it was reggae, it was dubstep. So everyone had a sense of ownership of the project. And I think that was really, really important to get that right. Once you get that, the flavor of the project right, you then have the right invitation for the audience, the visitors, the young children, young babies, mothers and toddlers coming in with their prams, and they didn't want to see the prehistoric Londinium. They just wanted to stay in the museum and have a good time. Even I myself, I must admit, I would come in and I was thinking, oh my gosh, how amazing during lockdown am I raving every single day, or every other day I was at the museum. So the whole experience within itself was a fantastic, the security guard, the staff, the canteen members, the cleaners. So it was it almost felt like, in the end, the beginning concept from the project being the reggae shop, from Emily, Cedar, Terry, to Don, to the audience, everybody, the host. It was a fantastic, inclusive experience. And I think that if any museum or organization wants to start with something, it's how you start something from the very, very beginning. It was well researched. It was a well-researched project, and the end result was executed brilliantly. Harry.
Thank you for that. That was absolutely brilliant. I think that really conveyed the fundamental values that you had with the co-curation. Sometimes I think museums don't realise they have quite an unequal power balance as institutions and can be quite off-putting. And I think you broke down the barriers by not being a Museum of London exhibition about a community, but a community exhibition in the Museum of London. And I was very fortunate to go and visit the exhibition. I go down to the Museum of London every 2 or 3 years. And one of the things I really enjoyed about the exhibition was sitting in the cafe afterwards and hearing dub being played. It was very much a very lively, active sort of exhibition, I felt, which really engaged the senses. And that leads me on to the next question, really. As it was a very engaging and sensory exhibition, I'd like to ask you what you thought the highlights were, and why did you choose the different media, really, that you put into the exhibition. And I think Emily might start off with this question, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, you said my answer, Bill. For me, it was the sound, it's the noise, and it was loud, because everyone said you can't not have it loud, you have to feel the bass. And I don't know, maybe that's not something potentially a little bit scary or a bit unusual for museums. There was a comment from conservation team about vibrations, but we got there, and it was like Brenda said, people were coming in and having a good time, and it felt like joy. And our director came in and said, can it be any louder? And you could hear it on all different levels of the museum. So that's just my quick answer. And it's informed lots more of our programming going on onwards.
Cedar, do you want to add anything to that as well?
Yeah, not much. I mean, as I said, the whole idea of the record shop and the record shop being this kind of place of knowledge was really key to the thinking. And I think one of the things is, I work in the museum sector, I visit museums and galleries the whole time, but I think because I'm dyslexic, so I actually don't really like reading when I'm in a museum. Generally, I never really read the texts. So I like listening to texts, or actually I find just speaking to people one of the most rewarding ways of getting knowledge. So that was really key, actually. That's also that whole idea of the record shop, and you could go into the record shop and you could actually speak to the person behind the counter and have a conversation. So that was really very fundamental from the start. And so, yeah, in a way, when I was thinking about the exhibition, which did evolve out of this kind of collecting project, I did have these kind of key kind of pillars of the exhibition. So it was the idea of having the record, and it was very much thought about and designed around the space. So it was about the space kind of looked like a record shop. So it was the idea of having a record shop, and a record counter with a person behind it was kind of pillar number one. A sound system stack, which we got from Channel One, and then the kind of images, because there's also such a rich history of amazing images which we could draw from. And that was also a challenge as well, because there are so many amazing images from like some of the photographers that have already been mentioned and you've seen in the slideshow. So how do we deal with this amazing you know, flood of images was a challenge. So the idea of having the slideshow was one thing, and also having the wall, but also the other thing was how do we make this contemporary? How do we think about this, that this is a subject that's relevant to now, but also has this historic, you know, because really a lot of people might say, and again, Papa Face can correct me, and Brenda, like, but the kind of golden age of reggae and dub in London is probably like the 70s and 80s. And that's also where a lot of the amazing images come from. But actually there's also this amazing kind of sound system culture still today, which has emerged from that. And so there's a lot of history in that, and a lot of history in relation to migration, and as was said as well, social political history. So it's like, how do we capture all this stuff? So one of the things that we did, you know, so something like Notting Hill Gate Carnival was a great opportunity to show a kind of contemporary manifestation, and probably the most mainstream manifestation of sound system culture in the UK. So working with Channel 1 was really important, and commissioning a photographer and spending the day at Notting Hill, and seeing the kind of life of a sound system through the day, from setting up or stringing up the sound system and doing all the sound tests and all that stuff, and just capturing that in an amazing series of and then obviously going through the rest of the day. And actually one thing also that was really important to that, and just worth mentioning, is that, you know, how that related to Grenfell, and how, you know, there were all these contemporary political issues come in, because in Notting Hill Carnival they do this kind of 62-second silence for the people of Grenfell, and there's a whole kind of political relationship to that. But so all these political subjects kind of seep in through the music, and the music is kind of inherently political anyway. And actually all the sites that we focused on all had kind of, you know, political ramifications to them. We were looking at like Brixton, Lewisham, Dalston, Tottenham, Soho, Ladbroke Grove as our key areas, and all those areas of London are really deeply embedded in kind of political struggles and histories that is always reflected in the music. And then another just brief aspect that I would mention that wasn't really covered, and again it could be a whole other exhibition, was the kind of literary aspect to it. There's a lot of literature that reflects this subject, and there's a whole history of literature kind of talking about the history of migration that where this subject also is reflected in. So there were all different areas that I was looking at and thinking about how can we capture all this. And like I say, the record shop really was the perfect frame for all of that. Yeah.
Would anybody else like to add to anything else to the answers for that question?
For me, the highlight was being in the shop and meeting people, like I said before, who had no clue about the music, or some people have never been in a record, or especially a reggae record shop, because back in the 70s, it was very intimidating for women, for youngsters. It was like young guys going in there, buying their records, and it was very intimidating record shops in the early 70s, I would say, up until sort of late 70s, and then it gave a bit more accessible. With the advent of Lovers Rock, more women started to come into the record shops and buying that sort of music. So the highlight for me was, again, meeting people who've never really engaged in the record shop, and also the children, and also people in their 20s, 30s as well. Eyes are being opened from, again, listening to what their grandfathers or their dads been talking about. It goes, oh, this is what you used to play, because a lot of people don't have records anymore. They don't have record players anymore. So the people haven't grown up with it. They've grown up with iPods and all that. And we've got like turntables to play and DJ, and they physically could see me DJing as well with the headphones on and with the sound effects as well. And it was just like, just the joy on their face to see it up was one of the highlights for me.
One of my highlights was receiving this award, which was fantastic, because it really means that there was a project which the Black community could be recognised and acknowledged, because often it's a forgotten community. So that was one. And I think Cedar said something, you know, this month is Pride Month. We've just had the Windrush, we've had Grenfell, and everybody that went into the museum was reflective of that. The whole highlight was to see the diversity of people, but also to see a really good proportion of the Black community that felt that they had a brilliant ownership, that their story, that their, you know, the life, the history of a sound system, of the blues dance, of so many wonderful contributions that particular generation, from the mento generation to calypso to ska, and just having that reflectedness of the community and being able to share that and give it, you know, offer our community and also receive something back. So that was my real highlight, actually.
Thank you. That sounds absolutely
sorry,
brilliant.
Sorry, Bill, can I just say my highlight?
Of course you can.
Just to get in there. I suppose my highlight with the people we ended up working with, I felt it was, I don't think I'm a very spiritual person, but I did feel it had that element to it. And I thought all the kind of communities that we were working with had that real element to them. And I think it came out in the exhibition. And I think there are many fans of however you want to class what dub is. And I think we try to capture that by having personal stories of fans. So somebody would write a piece of poetry, somebody would talk about how they got into reggae dub through a band, you know, called like a punk band called Public Image. And those little nuggets were really lovely. And I think having it, I totally understand the thing about interpretation and written interpretation. And I too hardly read anything when I go to museums. But what I've noticed, and I spent a lot of time in that space, is that people kind of read everything. They were taking photographs of the text. And it almost became, and I know we're having the feedback thing, it almost became like this learning thing, this learning institute, which was really kind of sweet to see. So as Popperface noted, like lots of families were coming in, so it was intergenerational, and it was like, you go and read that, or and I was approached quite a lot and asked if I could send that information to them. And this wasn't like white middle class, these are, you know, like Black youth, like Black elders. And I thought that was really like a nice side of it as well.
Thank you. I think I'm just going to, as a visitor, completely cold to the project, when I went to see the exhibition, one of the things that impressed me was I saw conversations, and I think that's a real golden aim of exhibitions, that it prompts people to have conversations based on what they're experiencing with each other. And sometimes you see museums inside, visitors in silence, and I saw loads of conversations. And this leads me to the last of my questions anyway, and I think this helps answer a question from Antoinetta as well. Can you just discuss the results of your visitor feedback, and what do you think were the significant outcomes of the exhibition? And I think it was possibly Brenda, were you going to start this answer, or you, Terry?
I think Emily, are you going to start?
I don't have the details on this, it actually sits with another of my colleagues, but I know in general terms, we did conduct visitor feedback. We did it by sort of face-to-face, person-to-person interviews with the team who were working in the space, and I think we had a good take-up. We had QR codes as well that people independently scanned and wanted to fill in the questionnaires. So as I said, I don't have all the detailed results, but I know that the audience is definitely skewed younger, as everyone has reported, than our usual audiences, and a much higher proportion identified as Black, Asian and from ethnic minorities. And in terms of outcomes, apart from this wonderful award, obviously, you know, I think I can just say sort of generally it has been just such a positive and what's the word I'm looking for, kind of a leading example for the museum, become a bit of a model for projects that we carry on doing in the future. But yeah, over to you guys who probably saw the outcomes much more firsthand in the space.
Percentage wise, from the surveys that were taken, there was an increase of new audiences, and it increased by 42%, which might sound low, of Black, Asian and minority kind of groups. And I was told that was an increase of like 30% on the usual audience for the museum. The other thing is the way we tried to approach people, it was a mix between observational, what they were using in the space and how they were engaging. And Brenda was the key person in it, and Popperface in training the hosts who, because they were trained to use the decks and become almost like record shop owners themselves with their own playlist, you could see them grow in confidence as they started to engage with visitors. And I think, like Bill has mentioned, like a key thing is the conversations that visitors would have with each other. They didn't necessarily know each other, but they might have started talking because they heard a track that Popperface might have played or one of the hosts might have played. So it normally involved a bit of dancing and then conversation, I think. But when we were doing surveys, I think there was and sort of like interaction with the public. I think there was much more willingness for the visitors to interact with museum staff rather than, please don't give me that form to fill in. It became almost like a part of the experience, which was kind of strange. And like sort of quotes that came back for us were, the space is too small. I think there was a large percentage of people saying it needs to be bigger. What's next? There needs to be a longer run. Lots of this is the start. These were sort of the quotes that we were getting back. So it was really positive. And I think it's impacted in the sort of the work, as Emily said, like moving forward and going into our new museum as well.
Thanks, Terry. The main feedback was that it could have been bigger, and the other brilliant outcome I felt that was the hosts who were part of working with Popperface and sometimes myself had gained transferable skills, because Popperface's experiences that he's had over 30 something years of DJing and his experience. So when we worked with the host, who were normally staff that belonged to the museum, they left with transferable skills. They were good at DJing. Their confidence was better. They were able to, if you had to put them in a music shop or in a theatre experience where you're using decks and machines, they were really capable, because during COVID they had 2 years of solid training. So that was one of the good things that I felt was a really fantastic outcome. The outcome was also seeing so many Black faces, people of colour faces that came through the museum. I think that was a really wonderful, wonderful to see. And the diversity, young people who hadn't seen vinyl, for instance. They were never exposed to vinyl. Some didn't actually know what vinyl was. So that was one of the figures I think the museum would have, but those was something that I felt was such a positive outcome from definitely from our experience. Yes.
Thank you. If nobody else has anything else to add to the question, to that question or the answer, we have got a few questions coming in. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. So I know we are quite towards the end of our time, but if everybody's got a few more minutes, I'll I'll ping these questions over to you, if that's okay. I'm going to work from the latest one to the oldest. Sorry for keeping anybody waiting. So, question from Helena. Do you roughly know how many people in the local community were involved in the development of the project? Just can you put a figure on how many people contributed?
Yeah, I you know, I could say I think I spent about a year doing the research for the project before the exhibition or the display came about, and it's hard to put a number on that community wise, because I was just having so many conversations with people. I would go to you know, sound system events and just have informal conversations with people, sound system owners. We had 50, you know, there was lots of challenges, because we had 15 reggae record shops as partners in the end, and even choosing the reggae record shops, because there's more than 15 reggae record shops in London. There's probably maybe about 25, 30 key ones. So just making that selection was pretty tough. So there was the reggae record shops that were key partners. We also did some events with supplementary schools throughout London, and that was an important part of the research process. We did some events with like community radio partners. We worked with free community radio partners. So, you know, just to put a number on it was, you know, maybe 50 or 60 if you had to put a number on it like that. But there were lots of informal conversations as well through the research process. So it's kind of hard to quantify.
Thank you, Cedar. Next question from Teresa. I hope I get your question correct, Teresa. Do you think that the information of research in museums will be received better by QR codes or by email instead of long text in the exhibitions? Don't know if anybody wants to pick up on that one, whether sort of digital media like email and QR codes can be better for research. And I think it's visitor feedback, but I could be not quite sure the question, I'm afraid.
Well, maybe I can jump in. Like I said, we had a digital exhibition guide, so we had supporting digital content. If that's what the question is, we did think a lot about how to, you know, there was so much to say, there was so much to include, we couldn't literally fit it all in the space, so we, you know, created a digital space, which was great. And like I said, we had good responses from visitors, and continue to. People still access those pages. But you know, there's challenges there as well. You don't want it to just become a dumping ground of all of your research. You still need to curate, and that's still your, you know, the time and resources of the team. But yeah, it went down well, and we think it did the right job of supporting the content rather than replacing it or just being. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear what the rest of the panel think actually.
I also think that the text that was in Dub was probably more accessible than the normal museum text sometimes that you get. And when you start writing text and you're writing about lived experiences as well, you know, there's a lot of responsibility, and it goes back and forwards with the communities that you're working with. And then it goes to museum hierarchy, who then look at it, and then you have to argue on behalf of your community as well to represent that tone of how you write. And I think it's really important. I have found personally, I did an exhibition on Rastafari before, that there was an insistence from the community that I was representing that they did want written text. It was important. It was seen as like a learning tool, and I think you can have. And I think when we did Dub, I think we all tried to cover all those bases. So it was spoken with Pufferface and Brenda being the face of the exhibition and interacting, and with the hosts. I think it was written text, and I think it was sound as well. And then we did the normal digital stuff, which like some of us aren't very good at. But yeah, we had QR codes and things like that that you could put your phone up, and then you could take that information away.
Thank you. We're coming to the end, but I'm going to ask one question, and I think this question would be lovely if everybody answered it and could answer it in a sentence. What was, for each of you, something that made you really feel the exhibition was a success, in terms of what was the reaction of a particular target audience of the exhibition, or a particular part of the audience? What was it that made you think, yeah, we've achieved what we set out to do? And I'm going to start with you, Terry, because you're on screen.
It was actually meeting people who came to the exhibition, and even though it was COVID, they would either be crying or you'd get a hug, and people saying "at last." I think that was important.
Thank you. Cedar, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, yeah, to be honest, I in a way, for me, it's slightly the wrong question. For me, I still feel that the reggae record shops themselves in the communities are the real exhibition, and the people I met in those communities in the reggae record shop, like those, to me, the kind of idea was that those spaces out in the real world really are other spaces that should be celebrated, and it's about keeping those places alive and that history alive. So just being able to bring an element of that into the Museum of London, I think that was the success for me.
Thank you. Emily, as somebody who works at the Museum of London, do you have anything you'd like to contribute?
All of the things you've said, I agree with, seeing little kids dancing, that kind of thing. But I think the real success is that, as Terry mentioned before, that it didn't end when it closed. The relationships have been maintained. It's really to the credit of the rest of the team, actually.
And now we'll finish with maybe a couple of replies from the people who were at the exhibition and were the faces of the exhibition. Papa Face and Brenda.
Oh, I think the highlight for me was, as I said, seeing the younger people appreciate what we've done beforehand, and hopefully inspire them to go to record shops or to build a sound system, or sort of explore what more there is about this music. So I think that was my highlight, to get them more open to what it was and what we've done before.
My highlight was, I think it's almost like what Terry said, the queue of people during COVID wanting to come to see a project which started with, through its research birth from Cedar to Emily, to Papa Face, and then executed with Terry and Griff and other people from the museum. And then also there is some of the staff who were really kind of like really rigid, and then eventually they loved it. They were asking us to play the records, so that's when you knew that it was a success, to actually break down some of the attitudes of the actual museum staff as well. So that was really wonderful.
Right, thank you very much. We are going to end there. I think I've covered everybody's questions. So I'd like to thank you all, and I'm going to say your names in the order I can see them on the top of the screen: Emily, Terry, Brenda, Papa Face and Cedar, for your time this evening and for giving a great exposition of the exhibition. Thank you on behalf of AHI and everybody who are members of the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation. Thank you, I think, for everybody who's attended this webinar. I think we've learned a lot about so many aspects, you know, the Black community of London, dub, co-curation, and probably the Museum of London's future plans as well, which sound like they've been influenced. So this is one of a number of webinars put on by the Global Alliance. And if members of their national associations, keep an eye on your websites, emails, your social media, you'll find out the date and time and subject of the other ones. So I'd just like to say thank you for everybody who's attended. And I think Song will play us out with some music. I hope that's right.
If we truly love